Hey everyone, this is Pastor Tori, and this is an overview of the Bible. We are in week 5, and we are covering prophets, Old Testament prophets. So we're going to jump right into it because this is going to be a longer one than I think some of the others were. And today we are covering all of these people. All the prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, it's the fun word to say, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So we're covering all of them today, and hopefully my voice will last. I have been having this crud cold that's been happening all over the area. And I finally got it. I got my tea. And so I'll be sucking on my tea and hopefully won't be losing my voice. So let's get started. Before we even get to any of the prophets, we have to ask ourselves the question, what is prophecy? And prophecy, a lot of times when you think about it, you think of somebody sitting behind a crystal ball or tarot cards, or thinking that they're going to predict the future with nothing else to go on. But prophecy in Scripture is not like that. Prophecy in Scripture is descriptive. They're asking the question, what has happened? It's predictive. What could happen in the future? And it's prescriptive. What should we do about it? So the prophets are asking all three of these questions as they're looking around and seeing what is happening in their time and in their culture and in their city. They're asking the questions, what's happening, what could happen because of what's happening, and because of what is happening, what should we do about it? And so this is the prophecies that they have written. Hold on, my foster dog is in the garbage. Excuse me. Okay. Apparently he found something very good in the garbage. Okay. So we're going to start with Isaiah. Isaiah was written between 740 and 701 BC while the Assyrian Empire was threatening the northern kingdom and Israel was in decline. So you have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and they each have their kings. And Assyria is going to come in to the north and attack the northern kingdom. Eventually, the southern kingdom is going to get attacked by Babylon. And so this was a time that it was written in a huge period of time. Most scholars believe that Isaiah was not the only one who wrote Isaiah. They think that there's at least 3 writers for Isaiah. And it covers hundreds of years of history. Some parts of Isaiah refer to the late 8th century BCE when Assyria dominated the ancient Near East. Some parts refer to Babylon at times, and other parts emerge the area of Persian rule that begins in the late 6th century. So you have Isaiah talking about the northern kingdom when Assyria came in. You have him talking about the southern kingdom when Babylon came in. And then you have him talking about after the exile when they go to Babylon and Persians come over and they attack Babylon and take over that kingdom. And that is where the Persians allow the Israelites to go back. So there's this huge amount of time that Isaiah is writing in. Probably Isaiah spent most of his life in Jerusalem. This book bears his name. And as I said before, some scholars challenge that claim that Isaiah wrote all of it. And Isaiah was also a contemporary of Amos, which we'll learn about later, and Hosea and Micah, which we'll learn about later. And he began his ministry around 740 BCE. Now, Isaiah is split up into three parts. Some call it First Isaiah, Second Isaiah, Third Isaiah. And First Isaiah is chapters 1 through 39, and that talks about Assyrian rule. That's when the northern kingdom was attacked by Assyria and basically destroyed the northern kingdom. Second Isaiah, chapters 40 through 55, they talk about the end of Babylon control. So now you're going to the southern kingdom after Babylon was taken into exile. And then third Isaiah talks about when Persia came in and took over Babylon, and talks about the Persian reign. And I don't remember if it talks about Israelites coming back or not, but those are the three sections of Isaiah. And then you have Jeremiah. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. His book is filled with pain and trauma and suffering. Unlike Isaiah covers a large amount of time. Jeremiah covers a short amount of time. It covers 3 Babylonian military invasions, one that happened in 597, one in 587, and one in 582. So it was only like a 15-year span that he is writing about. And he describes the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the walls, the destruction of the land, and also describes the death and the exile of thousands of people. Jeremiah speaks to Judah and tells them that they are unfaithful to God and that they are ignoring justice. And this is a common theme between many of the prophets, not all of the prophets, but many of the prophets. That is a theme, that Israel or Judah has been unfaithful to God, and they ignore justice, and therefore, because of this, the consequences are you will be overthrown by another kingdom or another empire in this case. Then we have Lamentations. Lamentations is written anonymously, but tradition says that this book was written by Jeremiah. And this language is blunt and it is graphic. It describes the destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. And it's asking this question: where is God in all of this suffering? And within this book, God is seen as silent. And while people are begging for mercy and compassion, God remains silent. And this book is considered poetry, but it's a specific kind of poetry that I am not well versed in enough to even describe it correctly. I do know that it is called a Hebrew alphabetic acrostic, and it takes the letter. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and each section or each chapter of Lamentations starts with a letter of the Hebrew, and it goes all the way through. And so, other than that, I don't think you need to know anything deeper than that, but it's a special kind of poetry that is written in. Then we have Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a priest, and this is a weird book. It's written for a highly educated audience with an intellect and historical and cultural setting that most modern readers don't understand. I'm a modern reader. There are parts of it that confuse the heck out of me. There's a lot of prophetic symbolism within this book. He talks about wheels, and he's the one that lays on his side for a certain amount of time, just to give this dramatic symbolism of what Israel's relationship with God is like. So Ezekiel is... tradition says that Ezekiel was taken in the first wave of exiles and lived out his life in Babylon as a priest. So he was relatively free when he was taken to Babylon. Those who were higher in social classes or richer got treated better. Those who were peasants did not get treated well. And if there were peasants that were just left to fend for themselves as well. So Ezekiel, even though he was taken into exile and taken to Babylon, he lived relatively free. And Ezekiel's message carries the belief that the Israelites no longer had access to God's presence. And that is a really sad message to give somebody. You no longer have access to God's presence. And then you have Daniel. Daniel's final plans are God's final plans for earth and humanity. That's kind of the theme of the book, or the second half of the book anyway. Parts of Daniel are apocalyptic in nature. The second part of it is. And the first part of the book has these folk tales about Jewish people working in a foreign court during exile. This is where you find the stories of Daniel in the lion's den. This is where you have the stories of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into the fire. These really, really fascinating stories about God's faithfulness and walking through treacherous times with the Israelites while they are in Babylon. And then the second part is Daniel's visions for what the end of time will be like. Then we have Hosea. Hosea is a prophet from the northern kingdom. He lived in the last years of the northern kingdom. And he is the first prophet to identify Assyria as the enemy. And he accused Israel of worshiping Canaanite gods. This goes back to the theme. You are worshiping other gods, you're ignoring justice, and so therefore is going to be some consequences. Hosea married a promiscuous woman named Gomer as a symbol of God's relationship with Israel. Gomer, his wife, was not faithful to him. And so he used that as a metaphor for God's relationship with Israel. And then we have Joel. Joel is a prophet of the southern kingdom. And Joel sees a plague of locusts, a severe drought, and a severe drought as the forewarning and destruction of Judah. Now, depending upon your interpretation of this, locusts were either real insects that were coming upon to plague the land, or a metaphor for Babylon. Some of the famous verses is Joel 2, 28 through 32, which you can look up. And I also need to do a side note too. Within our Bible study last week, we had a wonderful discussion, and we opened up the scriptures to each one of these prophets, and we kind of paged through and looked at a few passages just to get a taste of what they read. And so again, when you come to the Bible study, it's more than me just reading off the slides and me just talking at you like I'm doing here. There is more discussion, and it is, I don't know the word for it. It's better. I think it's better than me sitting here talking at you. So if you can come, please do. So Joel, going back to Joel, now we're at Amos. And Amos is not a priest or a court prophet like Isaiah was, or Jeremiah, or Ezekiel. Amos was a shepherd. He lived in a small town in Judah. He lived in Judah, southern kingdom, but prophesied both about both the Israel, northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom. And Amos had the perspective of, hold on, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay, Amos had the perspective of a country person, small town, probably a peasant, just a shepherd, a simple shepherd, seeing injustice from the other side, not in the courts, not in politics, but as somebody who's living in a small town and is seeing injustice all around him. So he's coming from a totally different point that Isaiah or Ezekiel is coming from. And the main part of his ministry was during the time when both kingdoms were prosperous and reaching new political and military heights. But he is out as a shepherd in this small town. He's seeing them taking advantage and the poor suffering. It was a time of idolatry, extravagant indulgence and luxury living, immorality, corruption, judicial procedures, and oppression of the poor. And I wanted to compare and contrast a little bit Amos, the shepherd from a small town, and Hosea. Amos declared that God was going to judge his unfaithful, disobedient, and covenant-breaking people. Amos seems angry. And then Hosea emphasizes God's love and grace and mercy and forgiveness. And we can see just by these two, remembering that these are different people writing from different perspectives at different times and different places, and they have different attitudes towards God's people, and they have different attitudes about God. And so you have these various voices coming through when you're reading the prophets. They're not all saying the exact same thing. They're coming from different settings and different areas. So please keep that in mind. Now there's Obadiah. He prophesies the same time as Jeremiah. And the subject of this book is not the northern kingdom, Israel. It's not the southern kingdom, Judah. Not even about Babylon or Assyria. The subject of this book is Edom. They were proud over their security and gloated over Israel's destruction by foreign powers. Edom was a neighbor of Israel and Judah. Descendants. They were actually relatives in various lines. If you remember back into Genesis, and it talked about Abraham and Sarah, and they had Isaac, his son Isaac, and then Isaac had a son. He had twins, and they were Esau and Jacob. And so Esau and Jacob, and the line went through Jacob and follows Jacob's story. Jacob steals the blessing. Jacob takes the inheritance, and Esau wants to kill Jacob. Now, later in Genesis, Esau and Jacob meet up again, and they seem to mend their fences and then part ways. Well, Esau is the father of these people, and they become Edomites or Edomites. And so now it's years later, and this group of people, the Edomites, Esau's relatives, are laughing at Jacob's family and relatives because they're getting destroyed. And so Obadiah writes to the Edomites about how God's wrath will be upon them because they didn't help their brothers, and they just sat and laughed at them and said they deserved it. So Edom's participation in Israel's destruction will bring God's wrath. That's what Obadiah was trying to get to. And then we have Jonah, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. And this book has been debated, and if it is a historical biographical narrative or some kind of allegory or parable. This is a story of a prophet that is sent by God to a Gentile town to proclaim God's message. And Jonah hated these people. They were Ninevites. He refused to go. So, through a series of unfortunate events, like getting thrown off a ship and swallowed by a giant fish, God convinces Jonah to go to Nineveh and give Nineveh's people God's message. So Jonah proclaims the message, and the Ninevites repent and they turn to God. So what does Jonah do? He gets mad because God did not destroy the Ninevites. That's how much he hated them. And he ends up sulking underneath a tree, asking God, why didn't you just follow through with what you said you were going to do? You said you were going to destroy them. And he's mad and sits under a tree. And if you're going to read any of the prophets, I suggest, if you haven't read Jonah yet, Jonah is a great place to start because I think it's only less than 50 verses. It's a short story. It's very entertaining. And it kind of gives a really nice view of how human we are. We get mad at injustice, yes, but when God has mercy on people you don't like, well, then we get mad because God didn't do that. And we still deal with that today. And it's a great little story. Then we have Micah. Micah lived in a small town in southern Judah. And Micah is sensitive to the social ills of the day, especially as they impacted small towns and villages. He could really relate to Amos. So Micah prophesied at the same time as Isaiah, but did not have that political knowledge that Isaiah did. So again, a lot like Amos, he comes from a different perspective. He comes from a small town perspective and prophesies from that view. And then there's Nahum. Nahum was written mainly to Nineveh, speaking of Nineveh and Jonah, after Assyrian took it over and made it their capital. And the focus of this book is God's judgment on Nineveh for their oppression and cruelty and idolatry and wickedness. And the book ends with the destruction of the city, which is really confusing because didn't, like 2 books earlier in Jonah, Nineveh turned and repented from their sin. And some scholars say that Nahum was written later on, and that this was after the Assyrians took over Nineveh. Jonah was before the Assyrians took over. And eventually, I guess, Jonah got his wish. So again, there's a timeline that these prophets were prophesying in. Nahum and Jonah were not in the same time. Nahum was later. And so now we have Habakkuk, my favorite name to say, Habakkuk. And he was a contemporary to Jeremiah. He probably lived in Judah. And his book was written differently than most prophets. There was no message that was addressed to Israel or Judah. This is a book that is a dialogue between Habakkuk and God. It's God and Habakkuk having a conversation back and forth. And Habakkuk's main question is, why does God allow evil to prevail? Which is a great question. And we still ask that question today. Why does God allow evil to prevail? And then we have Zephaniah. Zephaniah is this author is of a high social standing in Judah and most likely related to royalty in the royal line. He is aware of Isaiah's and Amos's work, apparently, because of some of the wording that is in there. And the theme, the coming day of the Lord, God will punish nations such as Judah, who has turned away from God, but ultimately pronounces restoration. So there is this theme happening with the prophets too. Yes, there's this happening of worshiping other gods and not doing justice. So therefore you're getting destroyed by either Assyria or Babylon. But then you have some of these prophets like Zephaniah going, but ultimately there is restoration. There is going to be restoration. We will come out of this okay. And so Zephaniah is one of those prophets that are saying restoration will come after everything is over. And then there's Haggai. And Haggai was written, if we fast forward through time, the destruction of both the northern and the southern kingdoms are done. Babylon has taken the southern kingdom, Judah, into exile. And now Persia comes and takes over Babylon. And now the Israelites are under Persian rule. And the Persians are kinder to the Israelites than the Babylonians. And so the Persians allows many of the Israelites to return back to their land. And so when they get back, they have a lot of work to do. As we learned, I think last week or the week before, Nehemiah and Ezra. Nehemiah went back and he was in charge of building the walls back, and Ezra was in charge of building the temple back. And so Haggai is speaking to this time. He's talking to the returned exiles and encouraging them to build the temple. And based on chapter 2, Haggai may have witnessed the destruction of Solomon's temple. This was the first temple that was built, that he witnessed it being destroyed. And we read about this in Nehemiah as well, is that some of the surrounding cities, probably Edom and others, were opposed to the rebuilding of the temple. There were many cities and little towns around, other people groups that did not want Israel to come back. And so they would attack the walls. We read about it again in Nehemiah a little bit more, but Haggai talks about it. He talks about the surrounding cities opposing the rebuilding of this temple. Then there's Zechariah. His ministry took place after the exiles returned from Babylon. He was born in Babylon, which is different. And he is the member of the priestly family. So he is a priest, if not very close to being a priest. And his message is about salvation and restoration. The destruction already happened. Now Zechariah comes in and he's talking about hope and restoring and forgiveness and being God's people again. And then the last one, we have Malachi. Malachi was written again after the exiles returned to Babylon. And Nehemiah built the walls back. Ezra built the temple back, like I said. And Nehemiah returned to Persia for a while, so they say. I'm sure it's in the scriptures somewhere, but I don't remember reading that. But it says that Nehemiah returned to Persia for a while. And then when he came back, he found that the way that he left the city and the temple, it wasn't functioning in the way that it was supposed to. He came back and the tithes were being ignored, the Sabbath was being broken, the priests became corrupt, and they were just reverting back to, again, what they used to be. And they were ignoring God, they were ignoring justice, and it just set them on this path again. So Malachi wrote about how the Israelites were just returning. You're doing it again. Stop doing this. And it's just history repeating itself. And the message of judgment and restoration again. And Malachi was one of the latest prophets to write before the Bible goes silent. And then in between the Old Testament and New Testament, we have about a 300-year period of silence. And so there is history that happened in that 300 years, and we'll talk about that next week. But this is an overview of all of the prophets. And I know it's quick, it's fast. I didn't have time to show you anything in depth, But like I said, come to the Bible studies and we get a little bit more in depth. But if you just want to get an overview and have me talking at you and you like this, perfect. I'll talk at you all day long. Well, at least for 30 minutes. So that is about it. Again, sorry about my voice. I hope that didn't annoy you too much. And Bible study is Thursday at 10 o'clock. We will be meeting in the library again. And come and join us if you can. We will be starting the New Testament and going through the Gospels. Have a really good day.